Hi friends, welcome to office hours. Thank you for taking time to populate the agenda. Alright, let's get started and folks can continue to add stuff if they think of something. Cool, so let's start with the first one. Review of division of labor among routes, controllers, models, and views. So what did you mean by division of labor? Which ones do what? Gotcha. So you're just asking what the MVC pattern is, essentially? Their respective responsibility. Gotcha. So let's start with the model layer because I feel like that's the most separate. So the model layer is responsible for storing and retrieval of data. So somebody wants to store information about a user. We send it to the model layer and just say store this piece of information. How the model layer stores it is up to the model layer. It could use a database, it could use a file, it could do it in memory. That's up to the model layer. And that's the abstraction we want to create. It just gives you functions that you can call, which can store the data. And once you call the function, you are sure that the data has been stored in some place, and it's easy to retrieve if at a later point in time. So that's the role of the model layer. The view layer is just responsible for updating the UI. Right? Anything to do with the UI, that's the view layer's responsibility. That means that the view layer is not responsible for fetching the data as well. It isn't responsible for any other information, any other responsibility other than just painting the view. So all the data that the view needs would be passed down as arguments. Like it should not have any logic to get the information and parse the information. All of that logic should be somewhere else, and just the data should be passed in. Saying that here is a page with space for 10 posts. So you have to pass down the 10 posts such that the view can just use those 10 posts to populate the view. The controller, which is essentially just the routes, is responsible for orchestrating the between the model layer and the view layer. So it's kind of like the middleman or the middle person, right? Like it will make a call to the data layer or the model layer, get the information, do some massaging to the data, or and then pass that along to the view layer. So this is the perfect time to use my tablet.
Oh. So are we supposed to actually structure our folders pretty much with those structural names like views, controllers, and models, or can we just keep that in mind while we basically structure our?
I mean, that's a pattern that is if you use the names, then it's easier to reason about.
Sure.
But yeah, you don't like using routes is okay because that's kind of like the equivalent of a controller. And sometimes people use domain instead of models. But the idea is the same. You have like the data layer, you have the view layer, and you have the controller layer. So, sweet, nice. So I have a model, right, and I have the view. I have the controller here. So the controller was going to make an information to say get, books, and then it's going to pass the books to the view layer, and the view layer is going to use those books to eventually paint the page. Right? Does that make sense? So the controller is the one that orchestrates and connects the model and the view. The model and the view are not directly connected. right? So the model can never directly send information to the view, because the model doesn't even know that the view exists. Similarly, the view doesn't even know that the model exists. They are independent entities. Only the controller is responsible for connecting the two. It's kind of like it's the delegator. So the controller, so requests come in. So if this is the browser, essentially requests come in from the browser and go to the controller to say, go to /books. Right? If I go to the /books page, the books page needs to show all the books in my system. Right? So the controller now goes to the model and says, give me all the books. And the model responds back with the books. Right? And then the controller then uses that books and passes it along to the view. And the view will generate the HTML of the books. And then that is sort of passed back here. And this is the response. Does that make sense? Questions? Yeah.
So that makes sense, but it's descriptive from the model represented by the linked and the agenda. Doesn't include routes. If you scroll down, you see a diagram. And so one more element there.
Right. So this is more from the perspective of. So that's fine. So routes and controllers are basically essentially one thing, because the routing. So in the way in Node, you kind of have the route defined, and then there's a corresponding function attached to a route, right? Which takes a request, response, and the next. So that function is essentially the controller. So the route is the one level above, which is where you're saying app.get, blah blah blah, app.post /post. So that is the route. So the function associated to the route is the controller, because it's the controller for the route. So the first thing that happens is the routing, right? It basically tries to match which route function that I need to execute based on the incoming request, based on the method type and the URI. So it tries to find the function which matches these two parameters. Once it finds the function, that's the function it ends up executing. So that's kind of like the first step here is finding the route. And then the second step is forwarding that route to that function. And then essentially that's what happens. So I kind of missed that one point, which is like the matching. The first thing that needs to happen is finding the match. If there's no match, it's not going to find anything, right? So the first step is going through all the routes defined in the server and seeing which one is the one which matches the request. Did that make sense? That's a good point. So if you look at the sequence of things that happen in an HTTP request, the request comes in from the browser, right? So from here, the request comes in, and then the first thing that happens, so each request has a method and a URI. Right, so the method could be get, post, put, etc. Right? As a URI could be like /books, or it could be like /dashboard. Right, so the request contains these two things that are used to match the corresponding routes in your server. Because in your server, you would have a bunch of different routes. Yeah, Jonathan?
So isn't it true that the request can also contain two other things, namely a query and a payload?
Totally.
And so all of that would have to be considered by the router.
So the request and the payload aren't used to match. They're used by eventually your route function. But for the matching, you're only using the URI and the method type.
I guess I can imagine that in some design, query parameters it would be, let's say, natural to make some of the query parameters determine which controller should act on the request.
Sure. So the only query parameter that's used is the URL parameter for the matching. Query parameters are not used for matching because you can have a request /book/1, right? And the one here is essentially a URL parameter because it's in the URL. But a query parameter can be anything, so that is not used for matching. That's just additional information on the request, but that isn't taken into consideration while finding a match for my request. The only things which are taken into consideration are the method type, the URI, right? So for example, we have app.get, dashboard, and then we have a request and a response, right? So here we are using the get, which is the method type, and the URI to do the match. So now if a request comes in, which is a post dashboard, and if this is the only request in our defined in our routes, there's going to be no match, and it's not going to be able to do anything with the request. So we have to always have. So that's why we have a fallback for all of our requests, which is a 404. Right? We have a 404, which is right at the end of all of our routes that gets executed if none of the requests match. Yeah.
So you said the query parameter is not used at all in determining URI matches. So even if you explicitly define a get route with, say, like dashboard /?, and whatever query, will it still default to this dashboard get?
Yeah. So adding a question mark here does not do anything. Yeah. So if you want to like add the question mark, instead you should use a URI parameter, which is URL parameter, which is like /:ID or something. Like that would be the match. Yeah.
So I guess that sort of leads to another question that I would have addressed if there's time, and maybe it should go to the bottom of the queue, and that is, what strategy makes sense to choose whether a given part of a request should be made into the URI segment or versus be made into a query parameter or
Gotcha.
payload.
When to use URL params versus query params. Okay. Cool. So how's the first one doing? Does anyone have any questions, final thoughts about this? I'm super happy to use my nice. Thank you for that. More questions like this, please. Okay, cool. So Rhonda, so how to change between different environments? Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, one of there's an article for the testing talks about like development environment, test environment. I don't know.
Gotcha. So
I don't know. You're like in those things.
So does everyone here know what an environment is? Okay, Rhonda, I'll ask you. What is an environment?
Are you asking about development environment? Or just
Yeah. So when somebody says develop an environment, what do they mean?
I mean, your environment in your local machine is set up to be able to produce whatever products.
Okay. So and then what is a production environment?
What is the what?
What is a production environment?
Production environment is an environment that's ready for deployment. I mean, to be used live in the live production environment. I mean, in the remote server somewhere.
Okay. So, and what is the difference between a dev environment and a production environment?
First of all, some of the packages you don't actually use for production. You can
Okay.
use for like you have like the dev dependencies you rely on when you do development, and then you pushing stuff up. And usually it's mostly only stuff that you don't mean that you have to use in production, pretty much. The dependencies. I guess that's how they differ a little bit.
So the differences are that there could be some packages which are not installed in production,
yes.
but sometimes they may be in development.
Locally, I don't have locally.
Okay. Yeah, Hannah?
Your production environment is also the one that's live, while your development is where you're like making changes to your code or like adding features, things like that.
Uh-huh.
And it's not always, it's usually buggy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you like make sure it's good for you.
Okay. Cool.
Your development environment will also like have a lot of tests that you're going to run to make sure that you fix bugs. And whereas the production environment, the users won't be able to see those tests, have access to those tests.
Okay, but that's more of a consequence of how I'm using the environment. But the environment could still, like, there's no reason why I couldn't run tests in production. Like, I shouldn't, but there's no reason why I couldn't, right? So I'm asking more from the, like, from a difference from the environment. So when I say, when we think of an environment, it's more like, what is a good analogy here? So like if you go to a club and there's like some music playing, one kind of music playing versus you go to a different club and there's a different kind of music playing. Like so that is the environment. Like there may be like different lights, there could be like different music, there could be like different like paintings on the wall. Like so those are the different things that exist in the environment that I'm in. So one of the examples was like the packages, right? So there's different packages available to me, which I can use. The other thing could be there's different settings available to me. So like the settings are like, process.env.database name is a setting. The value of it could be different. I still have the setting available to me, but what is inside of it is different. And I want it to be different because I want to do different things in different environments. Because in my test environment, I want to be able to like drop my database and reset my database and do all these things. So I want a database that is not got critical data in it, right? So I want my environment to have that kind of a database. Whereas in production, I want my database to be secure and safe and all of that. So those are some of the requirements, and then based on those requirements, I would have different settings in my environment. So that's what an environment is. And how to change. So when you say how to change, you're like, how do I be in the test environment versus how do I be in the production environment? Gotcha. So usually in Node, we have something called Node Env in Node applications. And this is so do you know what an environment variable is?
Or those things that change.
Right, so now environment becomes a little more of a conflated word because now you have a Node environment, which are like, what are the packages installed inside of my Node world? But then there's also a bash environment, which is like, what is the environment of my shell? You know what a shell is? Everyone know what a shell is? Right, so when I start a terminal, that's my shell. And my terminal itself has a bunch of settings. And those settings constitute the environment of the shell. Now the shell's environment could be different, right? And whenever I start a command, I can pass in environment variables to my command, right? So I could do something like, so if I have, I can say node env equal to development, and I say npm start. So what this is doing is adding another environment variable to my process. So now my process has its own environment, right? And my process has some default settings and default environments available to it. To that environment, I'm adding another setting, essentially. And I can do as many as I want. I can say node environment equal to this. I could say db name equal to foo. I could say like age equal to 10. I can do whatever I want. I can keep passing in because these are essentially just key value pairs, right? So there's multiple ways to pass these to my process. So I can pass them directly here, on the command line. I could also use a .env package. I don't know if I've used that. So there's something called a .env package. So this is a node package that helps you modify the process.env. So whatever I do here, whatever I pass here, gets added to my process.env. So process here is the the Linux process or the Unix process, and the Unix process. So npm start is starting like a process in the operating system, and that process has an environment, and that environment is accessible using the process.env variable. And I can modify that process.env variable by passing in these things, such as this. Or I can also use this package, which lets me create a .env file, which looks something like, do they have an example here? Yeah, so like this. So I could create a .env file and add like these different settings that I want to add. And then I need to just call this function. And this function will read this file and modify my process.env for me. So based on which environment I'm in, the values of these things would be different, right? Because if I'm in my production environment, then I want to like talk to my production database, which is located somewhere on the cloud. Whereas if I'm in my development environment, I want to talk to my local database, which is on my computer. If I'm in my test environment, I want to talk to my test database, which I can delete and drop and do whatever I want with. So does that answer your question? Or were you looking? Yeah.
Is there ever a reason to reinitialize the entire environment so that you have total control over what the environment variables are?
So reinitialize when and which environment are you talking about?
In any, like, in testing environment, for example, you want to know for sure what the environment variables are. Say process.env equals empty object, and then you could
I see.
Populate it with whatever environment.
I wouldn't do process.env equal to empty because there's like other environment variables that exist that you do not want to completely get rid of. I would only do like the diff, like what are the variables that I need, and I would explicitly set those.
So you don't have to worry about somebody's environment has not just values.
Yeah, because your program only cares about the environment variables it needs, right? These are just like to the program which only needs DB name, a value like host is meaningless, right? Like it doesn't even know where it is. So don't worry about that. So how to change? So there's Rhonda. There's actually a video on the YouTube thing about like changing, like how to create like different environments and creating a config file. So essentially, you would want to create a config file, which reads from your process.env, and your process.env is set differently based on which environment it is in. So for example, if you're in production and if you're using Heroku, then all of the environment variables lives in the Heroku settings, right? But when you're in development, you'll have a .env file. When you're in test, you'll have like a test file which contains the environment variables. So based on which environment you're in, the environment variables are loaded differently. But essentially, you want to use the same mechanism to get to the config, which is through the environment variables, which is what the abstraction is. Yeah. Okay. So how to use Promise.all?
Yes. I have a scenario that I know is trying to use Promise.all. I'm having kind of trouble figuring out where the pieces go. I'm trying to sign up a user with a hash password. So I want to hash the password and then create the route. And I'm having some trouble.
So what are the two things you want to do in parallel?
I want to hash a password and then I want to create the row. So I first need to hash it, and creating the row needs the hash password.
So how can they be done in parallel if you need the hash for creating the row?
More okay, yeah, that's true. More like how to chain the promises.
So how to change promise?
I think I might just be overthinking it. Just like how to set up, how to hash it, and create the bringer. Would that be in the database call?
No, there would be two separate functions. So one function would be to generate hash, but that's that returns the promise, right? And then another function is create user.create, and that returns whether. So when you resolve that, it returns like the response of whether the user was created or not. But like the user create will need the hash function's output, right, which is an encrypted password. So you first need to do the hash function and then resolve that, and you get the hash and you pass the hash down to the create.
So like maybe to create the hash inside the route and then call the database call and then so you like hash dot then create.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
But you ideally, since okay, we can talk about this later. But like, you don't want the hashing. The hashing is an implementation detail, and you don't want to expose that to your controller.
That's kind of what
you want. Yeah. You want to abstract that away too.
It's like that's a database function. It's not a model function.
What, creating a hash?
Yeah.
What does it have to do with the database?
It's like affects the row.
And that's how you're using the hash, but the hash independently has nothing to do with the database.
I guess that has to do with the user.
It has to do with nothing, right? Yeah, sure. Right now it's using the user, but it's just like a create encrypted string function.
Yeah. So like where would that live?
I mean, yeah, you can put it inside the models file and use it. Okay. Yeah. Just like create encrypted password, and that uses the hash.
And then I would call that before I call it the user.create in the route.
Cool. Is that good? So there's nothing to do with Promise.all?
I wanted it to be, but yeah, it's not.
Gotcha. Okay, so when to use URL params versus query params?
Versus tables.
So what's this post request? Okay, who has an answer to this question? Who knows what URL params are and what is a URL param?
That's when you do what you were talking about earlier, when you have like a colon and then ID or day or whatever variable you choose to name it.
All right, so you're saying if I have posts / ID. So is this a param? What kind of a param is it?
URL param.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, URI or URL.
So URL param, yes. Oh. No. What happened? Damn it. Okay, so posts and IDs. What is going on? The person ID. So this is, what is this? What was that?
That's a method, and then
Wait, what is a method?
like the HTTP request method I post.
Where is the method here? No, this is
route.
literally the route. This is the route.
Okay.
So let's say this was get request.
Oh,
So
post.
So this is method and URI. Right? So let's say URL or URI param, query param, and then what's the last one? Body. So is this URI param or query param or body param? What kind of param is this?
URI.
All right. So this is true. This is none of these. All right. Next one. Let's see. Continue a get request. We have dashboard. This is the URI, but then I'm passing in, age equal to 10. What is this?
Query parameters.
So let's say I have dashboard slash John, and then I have age equal to 10. What is this now?
It's still a query param.
Okay, so the question mark age is the query param. So we have age is the query param. What about John here?
It's part of URI.
Right. So let's say this was colon name. Right. So I got John there. So what was colon name?
It's the URI.
URI.
Right. So URI is name. Is there a body param? Okay, no body param. Cool. So let's say we had a post request now. And let's say we're creating a new comment. Right? And the data I'm passing in is title is hello, and body is aloha or something, right? So let's say I'm doing this, and this is a URL slash comment, or the slash comments. So is there a URI parameter?
No.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's that? No, continue your thought. Comments is what?
It's part of the URI.
I thought comments was part of URI.
Right, it's a URI, but
Yeah.
is it? Does it have a URI parameter?
No.
Unless it's very,
Right? Is there anything in the URI which can change? Right. So think of like parameters as something which can change, right? Which are dynamic. So in this case, in slash dashboard slash name, the name is dynamic, right? I could have dashboard slash John. I could have dashboard slash Anna. I could have dashboard slash Code, right? So this is a dynamic value. So that's a URI parameter. And then and every request can essentially have query parameters. So I actually lied. Every request can have query parameters by default. So I'm passing in post slash ID, but there's no reason why I cannot append a question mark and add age equal to 10. There's no reason why I can't do this to any request. I just have to add a question mark to the URI and I get automatically query parameters. So technically all requests can have query parameters. It's just that does the user, at the time of creating the request, do they add them or not? So query parameters exist, but they're optional. Optional. Okay. Whereas URI parameters are mandatory if the request is defined to have it. Right? So like if this is a route on your system, like in your server, then if this route is ever triggered, then the ID has to be there. right? So an example of this route would be /post/1, and the one there is the URI parameter, URL parameter, right? And there could or could not be a request.query.age, because those parameters are optional. So all query parameters are optional; they're not mandatory. Whereas URI parameters are mandatory. Okay, what about body? So can a GET request ever have a body?
No.
Why? Yeah.
I would think that if you want to get request to have a body, you could figure the routes and the customers to allow that.
But an HTTP request, an HTTP GET request, can it have a body?
I thought it would just put patch and I said no.
You said no.
I said no.
But why?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
So you want to get request at the body just right, like with curl, capital X, get,
Mhm.
and then the URI, and then D, and then
So the HTTP spec does not define a body for a GET request. It only defines the URI. So we can only send information on a GET request using the URI. So either using URI parameters or query parameters. The only request which has a body is either post or put or patch.
So I was right.
Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm. So that's like kind of like put, where you want to update a resource in your system, but you only want to send in the incremental change. So let's say I'm only updating the username and not updating the email and address and stuff. I only say username and new username. So it's like to such that you're minimizing the amount of data you're sending to the servers.
So does patch then have a smaller limit on what can be sent, or is it just used to identify other developers that?
Yeah, it doesn't have any restriction on the size. It's just about like how you're using it. You're just sending the incremental changes. Okay. Cool. So the only request that can have a body is put, post, and patch. Can a post request have query parameters? How many people say yes? Raise their hands. How many people say no? Good. How many people say I don't know? Okay. So query parameters can be added to any request because they are queries. So query parameters are something that are added to a URI, right? How do I scroll down? Oops. So if I have a request, HTTP localhost 3000/dashboard, right? And the route on my back end is /dashboard. So what is it? app.get dashboard /ID. Let's say this was the route. If I go to localhost 3000/dashboard, will this get triggered? No. Okay. So what do I need to add here to get this triggered? All right. So let's say I put in 3. So will this get triggered now? Yes. Okay. So now, what kind of request parameter is this?
URI.
URI parameter. Why? Because it's in the URI. right? It's part of the URI. So every time there's a slash, it means that it's part of the URI parameter. So this is a URI param. So now let's say I add age equal to 10 here. Can I do this? Will this still get triggered?
Yes.
Okay, it will get triggered because this is something that is ignored when it does a matching. It only looks at everything before the question mark, right? So I can change these things. I can say age equal to 10 and height equal to 100. Right? I can do these things. I can add like as many as I want, and none of these are going to affect the matching route. So what kind of parameters are these? Query params. So these are query params. And similar, so this is a GET request, right? So this is making it from the browser. So if I were to make a POST request, I can do all of these things. So POST request can have a body param, URL param, and a query param, all of them. So long as the route has a query, a URI parameter, right? And query parameters are things that are optional, and every request can have them. Does this make sense? Felt like there's a lot of information. Okay.
And plus, you're recording this, right?
Yeah.
So you slide it over.
Cool, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question about when to use. So
Gotcha.
you sort of answered the question when may you use. Now put and post and patch request. Where's the question? What to use?
Gotcha. Okay, so whenever you are sending any information which is sensitive, use a POST request. Because if you have, if you're using the HTTPS protocol, the body is always encrypted. Right. So any time you want to send information like emails or like social security numbers or anything that is sensitive, do not send that information as a query parameter or a URL parameter, because the URL is always visible to plain text. So anybody who's sniffing on the network can actually get the full URL, but they try to sniff the body, and if you're using HTTPS, the body is going to be encrypted, and they're not going to be able to decode the information. So that's when you use a POST request. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, but I thought I had seen many providers of APIs say that when they issue a key, an API key to a user, that API key goes right into the rather than into the file.
The API key, or you mean the token?
Whatever it is that identifies the requester as having the right to.
Yeah, that's the token. The token is fine.
So why isn't that sensitive?
Because the token is issued like it's kind of like a day pass. It isn't like your credentials. So that's what like OAuth uses. So OAuth issues what is known as a token and says for an hour this token is valid and you can like use this service. And then when an hour expires or whatever, if the token gets leaked or then you can you can invalidate the token, but that doesn't leak the credentials itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just thought I'd see API say we want to use the API for more than occasional use. Request a key, and we'll issue you a key, and that's your key for good. And where it goes is into the URI. That's what I thought it was. So like the URI starts with the key in every case, and that permits.
Yeah, I would not put. Which API was this?
I think I've seen it several times, and that's why it's sort of stuck in my mind as a pattern. It seems to clash with it.
Yeah.
Secret.
Do you have a question?
I do. Yeah, okay, so if you have like a GET request with a bunch of query params in there, and then you try to request this page, but you're on the login page, so you get like redirected back to the login page. How does it know what to send you back to the page you came from instead of?
That's a good question. Emma's not here. Okay, so you can do it using many ways, but the typical way people use it using query parameters, right? So whenever I redirect, I'm essentially creating a new request, right? I am, let's say, from the perspective of the server. Let me use this one. Right. So let's say, this is the browser. I make a request to go to the / dashboard. Okay, never mind. I'm just going to let that. So if I make a request to the server, and I want to go to the dashboard page, but the dashboard is under authentication, and now it says it redirects you to the sign up page. So whenever I redirect, it's essentially making a new request, right? It's making a new request, and now you have a new request response object from the perspective of the server, right? Remember, like in your server, you have every request that comes in, you have a handle on that request, right? You have a REQ and an RES and a next for the next thing. So the request and response, the request object contains all of the information about where the request came from, what were the query parameters or the body parameters, all of that, right? It's the HTTP request. Now, when a request comes in, you know where the user wanted to go, right? There's something called a request.url, I think. That request.url contains the path of the request. Now when you redirect, you're essentially losing that request. So let's say I'm going to use this. Let's say you had R1, right? R1 was going to the / dashboard. But in your R1 function, in your request response function, you are now saying redirect to /sign in, right? Because they were not logged in. So now when you're redirecting, you're essentially creating R2. Right, so R2 now becomes /sign in, but we still want to maintain this, or we want to store this information somewhere. Right, we want to keep hold of this dashboard so that when the user signs in, we can redirect them back to the dashboard page. What are the ways to? So in a request, what are the different ways in which I can keep track of information? Okay, so cookie, but that is on the browser, right? But on a request,
Yes.
What are the different parts of the request where information can be sent?
Query params.
Okay, so there's query params. So there's query params. What else? We just spoke about these.
URI params.
URI params and the body params, right? But when you're redirecting, what kind of a request is it?
A get.
Okay, so it's a GET request. So can we have a body param in a GET request? So this is eliminated, right? URI params. What would happen if we use URI params?
We'll have to go to a route that matches that
Right.
URI param.
So we'll have to have sign in / redirect URL or something, right? Some sort of a, what is this? A URI parameter, which is like redirect URL. But we don't want that because that makes it wait, I want to erase, let me erase it. So I don't want to use URI params either because now that pollutes my URL, right? The only thing I can use is query parameters. So now I can add a query parameter here to say redirect URL is equal to /dashboard. right? So now in my R2, I have R2 dot query dot redirect URL available to me. So I want to continue to pass this query parameter. Every time I create a new request, I have to ensure that the query parameter is passed down. So now, so when I create the sign-in page, what happens? What will happen when I render the sign-in page? Anybody?
Well, like render HTML or EJS, whatever
Right,
template
so,
you're using with the form.
right. So you have a form, right, which is like got two checkboxes, like username and password, and a submit button, right? So now, when I click on this button, what will happen?
We'll try to do a post to sign in.
Right.
Sign in route.
So we'll try to do a post. So now we technically have an R3, right? So this was a get, R2 was a get, R1 was a get, right? So now we have a R3, which is a post. So what happens when we, so we want to maintain this dashboard and send it across to R2 and send it across to R3. How do we send it across to R3 now?
Well, yeah, I would say the processor of R2 needs to modify the value of the action in the form to include the redirection information.
Absolutely. So every form has an action, right? And that's the URL that it's going to submit to. So in our case, we're going to submit to sign in, but the method is going to be post, right? So this is method is post, and then action is sign in. So what Jonathan is saying is now we want the sign in to also pass along the redirect URL. Does that make sense? So we pass this along. So now when the post actually happens, and once we check for the username and password to match, and like blah blah blah, we find that the user is actually a real user. Then we just say r3.query dot redirect URL, and we just like redirect to that. We just redirect to r3.query dot redirect URL. And this will redirect back to dashboard, because that's what was something that we were keeping track of. This is very interesting because this is not something you would think about using query parameters for, right? Like the first logical thing that would come to you is cookies. That, oh, I can use a cookie because this is something that I want to share across different requests. But then cookie becomes a little overcomplicated for this, is because now you have to like delete the cookie and create the cookie and make sure that you're not keeping the cookie for longer than. So you have to now have this other management of your cookie. But just doing it using query parameters makes it like simple jobs, much simpler than a cookie.
What did you mean earlier by your URL pollution? What do you mean? Like you did not want to put up the URL. What did you mean by that?
That's when we use a URI parameter. So what did we learn in the previous thing? The URI parameter is not optional, right? So if I want to pass along something in the URI parameter, it should always be there. It should always be a redirect URL. So let's say your redirect URL was like a URI parameter, then my URI parameter would, so right now I have /dashboard, right? And here I can say redirect URL is equal to, /post or something, right? Because it's a query parameter, I can send whatever I want. But let's say I wanted it to be mandatory, which is URI, then I have to have a redirect URL here. That means I can never have a request call just /dashboard. Because this will not match. Does that make sense? Right? So the only thing that will match is a dashboard / something else.
Resource, whatever it is.
Right. But when I have a query parameter, since this is optional, it will match even the one without any query parameter. So even /dashboard will match, but also I can match with with a question mark redirect URL. Equal to true. Yeah, Jonathan.
Good. Then you can have two different routes, one with and one without.
Right, I can, but that's just like overcomplicating things. So that would be the other option, which is to have another route, which is just like /dashboard, and then have another route with the URI parameter. But then they're just like adding two functions, and there's duplication of code. Instead, just have one route and use the query parameter. Because whenever you have optional parameters, use query parameters. That's the intent. That's like the framework of thinking. Optional parameters, because redirect URL is not something that's going to be there all the time. If somebody directly goes to the sign-in page and signs in, then you don't need to redirect them to like a special page. You just redirect them to the default page, right? But if somebody goes to like see all my posts, and then you realize that they're not logged in, right? And then you redirect them to the sign-in page, and then you want to redirect them back to the posts page. That's when you have the optional parameter of like, what is my redirect URL? So whenever you have optional parameters, query parameters. Whenever you have mandatory parameters, URI parameters. Like for example, if you want to go to /post/10, this is mandatory. You cannot go to a specific post without giving me the ID, right? So this has to be a mandatory parameter. So then you use it as a URI parameter. Make sense? Any last thoughts, questions, conclusions? No? Cool. Thank you. It's 11 o'clock. So I'm going to stop here.
Thank you.